Hello everyone, Victor Tanzig here, and welcome to the Reddit Railway. Today's destination is r/bullied, which includes a couple of stories submitted by you guys, so all aboard! Me and my friends were hanging out together during our school's lunch break. All of a sudden, a big, unfriendly looking guy accidentally bumped into one of my smaller friends. He got angry at my friend and started pushing him around. I took my friend inside so we could stay away from the bully. Suddenly, my friend went back outside where the bully was having a go at another one of my friends. I had to quickly put something in my locker, which was also a bad move because I could have been there to try and fight off the bully. When I came out, my friend was clutching his ribs and crying. I just grabbed him and took him to first aid. The bully was suspended. He had been suspended several times before and was warned if he got into one more fight, he would be expelled. What we didn't know at the time was that he was in our grade. The following year, he would actually end up in our class. He hasn't tried starting any shit yet, but you still wouldn't want to piss him off. And my friend is okay now. That's good. Bullying really ticks me off. How much of a lowlife do you have to be to attack someone for no reason? Don't blame yourself for what happened, OP. Even if you had been there to break up the fight, it still would have ended badly. Hell, maybe you would have been the one to end up in first aid. Keep your guard up, and if he tries anything again, flatten him. For about 6 years, I practiced mixed martial arts at a private gym close to where I lived. I started there when I was about 10. I was very overweight at the time, so my first year there was really challenging. I was always getting pummeled by the more athletic kids, but I eventually became the gym's shining star thanks to the support of my parents and friends. I went from being a pathetic little wimp to 2-time state champion. However, this all went down the shitter during my last year there when a kid named Carlos joined our gym. He used to wrestle at one of the biggest high schools in the city. He was a real show-off, flexing his moves and so on. He would also use cheap tricks to win during practice. Every time someone would quote-unquote lose, he would mock them and call them names. It didn't help that the coach showed obvious favoritism towards Carlos and let him get away with his crap. Carlos used this influence to bully the younger kids. If one of them ever told him to get lost, he would threaten to have the coach kick them out of the gym. We tried telling the coach this, but he didn't care. He just told us to be tough like Carlos. Now, Carlos hated me the most. From the beginning, we argued. These got more intense over time thanks to the coach's favoritism. Carlos used to taunt me since I was the biggest one in the gym. Those names I mentioned, the one he had for me was Fat Tard, even though I wasn't fat anymore, just muscular. One day I was sparring with Carlos and my dad came to watch. Carlos knew this and decided to be especially obnoxious. My dad pulled me aside at one point and said I shouldn't put up with that and to tell the coach. I told him I tried, but he never listened. Dad told me to make him listen, and if Carlos spoke to me like that again, I should grab him by the shirt, look him in the eye and tell him to knock it off. I kept this in mind. Something I should have mentioned earlier is that Carlos and I are the same height, but I'm a good 50 pounds heavier. I'm also fairly agile for my size. Another thing that's also relevant is that my dad had his gallbladder removed during a recent surgery, so his stomach was very sensitive. Carlos and I continued sparring and I noticed his punches felt harder than usual. Then I figured out why. For those who don't know, boxing gloves are filled with foam to soften the blow. Carlos hadn't filled his gloves. When I realized he had pulled another of his dirty tricks, I had enough. I backed away and took off one of my gloves. He then charged towards me, so I hit him in the chest with my bare fist. Winded, I grabbed him by his shirt and shouted at him that he had cheated for the last time. My dad walked onto the mat to yell at Carlos, calling him a prick. Then, Carlos did something that still makes my blood boil. He broke out of my grip and fucking punched my dad in the stomach. It took me a fraction of a second to figure out what had happened. When I did, I went after Carlos. I knocked him out with the hardest punch I have ever thrown. I then got on top of him and started bashing the shit out of him. All of my friends and the coach had to pull me off Carlos. Good thing too, as I probably would have killed him. The cops and an ambulance soon showed up. They took Carlos and my dad away. I was crying with rage from the whole ordeal. Everyone comforted me and told me I did the right thing. It was about time Carlos got a taste of his own medicine, they all said. My mum came to pick me up and we drove to the hospital where my dad was. He said he was proud of me for what I did. I left Carlos in a real mess. He had a broken nose, a broken eye socket, and several skull fractures. He went to court for assaulting my dad and was given 10 years. My friends and family celebrated the sentence while continuing to congratulate me. We all quit that gym since the coach was a douchebag. He lost a huge amount of business and was forced to close down, and my dad made a full recovery. Well done, OP. Is there anything more satisfying than hearing about a bully getting a beat down? And screw the coach for letting him get away with his nonsense. I'm glad his business went under. Sounds like OP really messed up Carlos. Also sounds like he deserved every bit of it. Fuck you, Carlos. I was the quiet type during middle school with a huge passion for manga and anime, which people found weird. Even though I didn't have many friends, I had some, two of which were Raven and Howard, who we called Howie. I also introduced a new guy named Brian to the group. Out of all my friends, Raven was my bestie. She and I had dated during our last year in middle school, but broke up that summer. For a while we didn't speak much, but we made up and returned to being best friends. Okay, let's get on with the story. At the start of our sophomore year, Raven and I were lucky enough to have the same history class together. We sat next to each other alongside a senior named James. He and I got along quite well. He's the type of guy who always speaks his mind and would sometimes boast about things he's supposedly done. After a few weeks, he noticed my close relationship with Raven and asked about her. I told him about our history as friends and former lovers. He then said she was cute, so I encouraged him to ask her out. He was reluctant at first, but eventually did, and she said yes. Since we all had the same history class, we had fun for a while. Then James started acting up. During a group assignment, I was working on my part, whereas they weren't. I kindly asked them to make a start, and Raven immediately did, but James turned to me and said, "You know, if you focus less on studying and more on your appearance, you might get a girlfriend." I was very offended by his comment, and Raven defended me. When we told our friends what happened, they all agreed he was out of line. Brian then asked for James's full name. When I told him, Brian said he knew James. They had both been in a program that helped children with a variety of issues. For Brian, it was being a slow learner. For James, he had trouble controlling his temper. I also found out the other seniors really hated him. After learning this, I kept a close eye on James, and he started showing his true colors. Whenever he saw Raven hanging out with a different guy, he would start threatening them, even if they were her friends. One time, Howie noticed how poorly he was treating Raven and stood up to him. James pinned him against a locker and grabbed his throat. Howie fought back by punching him in the face. James ran off and told the school Howie attacked him. Howie got into trouble, even though he wasn't the one who started it. Another time, James threatened to kick my ass. I told a teacher and the principal had a word with him. Later that day, Raven got a message from James calling me a tattletale. He then asked if she preferred me or him. She answered, OP, obviously. He then said his father was a politician, and if he and I were to get into a fight, I would most likely get arrested. This is when James really started to get on my nerves. He boasted about moving a 400-pound cabinet all by himself and that he could beat up everyone in school, even if they teamed up against him. He broke up with Raven but came back an hour later begging that she take him back. I warned Raven she shouldn't, but she's a kind soul who always gives people second chances. I messaged him on Instagram, calling him immature. He told me to mind my own business and to leave them alone. I got so frustrated that I blocked him. During our second semester, I moved to a harder math class, so my history class was moved to a different hour. I felt awful leaving Raven alone with that sorry excuse for a man, but my friends promised to keep an eye on him. After a while, Raven dumped James permanently, which was a huge relief for all of us. We all graduated that year, but something strange happened during the ceremony. The students would walk up to collect their diplomas after their names were called. When James's name was called, he was nowhere to be seen. I don't know what happened to him, but if he shows up again, I'll be ready to fight him. I hope so. It really gets on my nerves when bullies take advantage of good people. It also annoys me when they're given second chances when they clearly don't deserve it. Quoth the Raven, nevermore. This guy insults and assaults your friends and you take him back? What's wrong with you? At least she saw the light and gave him the flick, so good on her, I guess. And good on OP and his friends for looking out for one another. Best of luck to all of you. And with that, I'll end the video here. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good one.